It was just another autumn day in 1982 at Briar Glen Orchard in Windham County, Vermont. The kind of day that smelled like crisp apples and fresh leaves. The kind of place where kids should have been laughing, picking fruit, and learning about harvest time. Instead, 6 second graders vanished without a sound. No screams, no footprints, just silence. Their teacher was found unconscious hours later, with no memory of what happened. For over 40 years, the case went cold. Families mourned. The town whispered, and the orchard stood quiet, hiding secrets no one could imagine. Then, in October 2024, a demolition crew uncovered something buried deep beneath the roots of an old apple tree, a steel hatch leading to a hidden underground shelter. What they found inside shocked the FBI and reopened wounds that had never really healed. Inside, they discovered personal items, children's drawings, and a cassette tape labeled Day 1. But the most chilling discovery was this: only 5 names were scratched into the concrete walls. 5 names, 6 kids went in. 1 never carved their mark. Detective Sandra Rand, a seasoned investigator with a quiet determination, was the first to step inside the shelter. What she saw there would haunt her for years. Dolls' missing eyes, melted crayons, and rules written in shaky handwriting: no crying, no telling, don't wake the quiet boy. It was clear this wasn't just a hiding place, it was a prison. A prison for children. As the investigation deepened, a name surfaced that no one expected: Silas Lane, a man who supposedly vanished in the 1950s. A man some called a ghost, others called a monster. Rumors said he built secret rooms beneath orchards, places where kids learned not to scream. But how could a man who disappeared decades ago be connected to a crime in 1982? And why did the caretaker of the orchard, Mr. Barley, seem to know more? Then he was letting on. Then there was Riley Foster, one of the 6 missing children. His journal was found inside the shelter, the only written account from someone who lived inside those walls. But the more Rand read, the more questions she had. Riley wasn't afraid like the others. He understood the rules too well. And in one of the final entries, he wrote something that didn't make sense. Asterisk, she scratched it for me. I was ready. Asterisk, who is she, and what did he mean by ready? As the FBI pieced together the puzzle, they uncovered a photo that changed everything. A torn school picture, partially burned, revealed not 6, but 7 children. One of them didn't belong to the 1982 field trip. Her name was Greta Mae Winton, missing since 1979. She had been there before the others. She had taught them the rules, and she had waited. But if Greta was the 7th child, who was the one who never carved their name? Who was the 6th child that left or never left at all? The deeper Detective Rand dug, the darker the truth became. Because what she found next wasn't just a missing child, it was a pattern, a cycle, and if they were right, it might not be over yet. So if you're ready to dive into a mystery that spans decades, a case that rewrites everything we thought we knew about missing children and hidden horrors, stay with us. Because what we're about to show you will make you question who the real monster was, and who might still be listening, even now. But before we go further, we want to know, what do you think happened to the 6th child? Was it escape, or something far worse? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Deeper Detective Sandra Rand dug, the more tangled the story became. The shelter wasn't just a hiding place, it was a system. A prison built with purpose, hidden beneath generations of roots and silence. Every wall had been carved by small hands, every corner marked like territory in a game no child should ever have to play. But the most disturbing part wasn't what they found inside, it was who had built it, and how long it had been there. Silas Lane's name surfaced again and again in old records, whispered in rumors passed down through townsfolk like ghost stories told around campfires. He was supposed to have vanished in the 1950s, a quiet man with calloused hands and a fondness for orchards. Some said he helped farmers dig root cellars. Others claimed he lived alone, in the woods, building things no one ever saw. No one knew if he was dead or alive. But now, after decades of silence, his shadow stretched across the case once more. Rand pulled up every document she could find on him: property deeds, census reports, even local newspaper clippings from the 1950s. There were mentions of strange disappearances near farmland where Silas once worked, but nothing concrete, just whispers, just patterns too faint to prove. One article caught her eye: a missing boy named Elijah Connors, last seen in 1976 near a farm not far from Briar Glen Orchard. His photo looked eerily familiar. Same dark eyes, same sharp jawline, same expression that seemed to see right through you. It was almost like looking at Riley Foster. That's when the questions started piling up. Who really was Riley? He wasn't listed in any school records before 1982. No birth certificate, no medical history. He appeared out of nowhere, enrolled in the 2nd grade like any other student, never raising suspicion. But now, with Elijah Connors' file sitting beside Riley's, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Could Riley be Elijah? Had he been taken before, escaped, and simply disappeared into another life? She turned back to the journal, recovered from the shelter. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like whoever wrote it had done so in fear. Most entries were short names, rules, descriptions of the rooms, but one passage stood out. Asterisk, he watches us from the square hole in the ceiling. That matched what Harper had described years ago, the way she used to glance upward like something was always watching, something waiting. The shelter had a hatch above room 6, barely visible under layers of dirt and rot. When they opened it, they found a narrow tunnel leading toward the surface, ending in an old storage shed covered in dust and cobwebs. It hadn't been touched in years, or had it? Inside, they found a rusted lantern, a child-sized coat, and a single red thread tied around a nail hammered into the wooden beam. The same red thread that kept showing up in different parts of the shelter. In Harper's pocket, tied around a crack in room 7. Even wrapped around a doll's wrist. It was a message, a marker, a reminder, but of what? Back in 1982, after the children vanished, the town tried to move on. The orchard stayed open, though fewer families dared bring their kids. Teachers avoided mentioning the incident. Parents whispered about strangers lurking in the trees. And then, as time passed, people stopped talking altogether. Grief has a way of fading into silence, especially when there are no answers. Harper Greer was the only one who couldn't let go. She returned to the orchard years later, walking straight to room 7 without hesitation. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just placed her hand against the wall and whispered thank you before tying the red yarn in a loop around the cracked stone. She never explained why, never gave interviews, just walked away like she had finally closed a door that had been left open for too long. But maybe the door wasn't closed. Maybe it had never been. In 2024, motion sensors near the orchard went off again, not once, but multiple times over several nights. Security footage showed nothing but shadows moving between the trees. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just flickers in the camera feed, like something passing just outside. The frame detective Rand led the team back underground. Nothing had changed except for one thing. A new scratch on the wall. Fresh, uneven. Just 2 letters this time. H&G Harper Greer. Had she come back, or had someone else been down there? They checked the perimeter. No sign of intruders. No broken locks. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant hum of insects. But when Rand turned off her flashlight and listened, she heard it again, the same sound from the cassette tape recovered decades earlier. A slow, deliberate scratch, then silence, then breath. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a signal, a place that remembered, a place that waited, and someone had answered. As the investigation continued, more pieces surfaced, fragments of audio from the cassette tapes, forensic reports detailing fingerprints found in the dust, and finally, a connection between Riley Foster and an abandoned farmhouse deep in the Vermont woods. The house had been sealed since the 1970s, its owner unidentified. Inside, investigators found drawings pinned to the walls, stick figures standing in circles, surrounded by words like stay quiet, don't blink, and he's still listening. One sketch showed a boy sitting alone in a chair, spotlight shining down, facing a mirror with no reflection. Another showed 6 children standing in a line, and one figure behind them, tall and faceless. There was also a box filled with letters addressed to no one, written in the same handwriting as the shelter journal. The final page read, asterisk, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But he isn't. He never leaves. He waits for someone else to come, someone else to listen. If you hear scratching, don't answer, don't look up, don't say his name. Asterisk, no signature, just a drawing of a red thread tied in a knot. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the case wasn't just about 6 missing kids, it was about something older, something buried not just in the earth, but in memory, in fear, in silence, passed down like a family heirloom. And at the center of it all was Riley Foster, because if he was Elijah Connors, that meant he had survived longer than any of them, longer than Greta, longer than the others who had scratched their names into the walls. But had he survived? Or had he become part of the system himself? Rand stared at the journal one last time before closing the file. Outside, the wind howled through the orchard. Somewhere beyond the trees, a crow called out, and deep beneath the roots, beneath layers of dirt and forgotten footsteps, something moved. Or maybe it was just the wind. Maybe, but as she stepped out of the shelter and into the cold October air, she couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Not yet, not ever. Ribe, because the next part is going to blow your mind. Detective Sandra Rand sat alone in the dimly lit room, surrounded by stacks of old case files, forensic reports, and audio transcripts. The shelter had been sealed for weeks now, but the whispers hadn't stopped. Not for her. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the faint scratching from the cassette tapes, a sound that didn't belong to any child, not anymore. She replayed the latest audio enhancement one more time, headphones pressed tightly against her ears. The voice was clearer now, not just Harper's desperate plea, but something else beneath it. A second voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably there. It wasn't speaking. It was breathing. Waiting, she leaned forward, heart pounding as she isolated the background noise. There, buried under layers of static and echo, was a whisper, barely audible, but chilling in its calmness. Don't look up. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. One the children had obeyed for years. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like it always did this time of year. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the orchard felt alive. Rand stood, grabbing her coat and flashlight before stepping into the cold October night. Something inside her refused to let go of the feeling that they were missing something crucial, something hidden even deeper than the shelter itself. The town had moved on, or at least tried to. News vans had long since left. Parents had returned to silence, but the orchard remained untouched, roped off with caution tape that fluttered like a ghost in the breeze. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed something she hadn't before. The security camera footage from the previous week showed motion again, not near the shelter, but farther back, past the rope barrier where the trees grew dense and shadows stretched unnaturally long. No footprints, no signs of tampering, just movement, watching, always watching. She stepped carefully, boots crunching over fallen leaves. The closer she got, the more the air seemed to shift, heavier, colder, like walking into another time. And then she saw it, a single red thread, tied around a low-hanging branch, swaying gently despite the lack of wind. The same red thread found in the shelter, in the doll's, in Harper's pocket. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't random. Someone had placed it here. Recently she followed the thread deeper into the trees. Flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The forest grew quieter with each step, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then, just ahead, she saw another thread tied around a tree trunk. Then another, and another. A trail leading somewhere only those who knew where to look would follow. And then she heard it, not wind, not an animal. A slow, deliberate scratch against wood. She froze. The sound came again, sharp, rhythmic, like nails dragging across bark. From above, her head tilted upward. And there, hanging from a high branch, was a small wooden box. Rusted hinges, cracked paint, inside a folded piece of paper. She reached up, pulling it down with trembling fingers. Unfolding it slowly, she read the words written in shaky handwriting. Asterisk, he doesn't need walls anymore. He has them in his head he never left. He waits in the quiet places. He knows when someone is listening. Asterisk, it wasn't signed. But below the message, drawn in smudged pencil, was a stick figure standing alone in a circle. 5 figures around it. 1 missing, 6. Kids went in, 1 came out. But what if the one who came out? She turned sharply at the sound of rustling behind her. Nothing. Just the trees. Just the wind. Or was it? Back at the station, Rand spread out every photo, every transcript, every recovered item on the conference table. She stared at the journal. Entries again, scanning for anything she might have missed. Then she found it, a line buried deep in one of the final pages. Asterisk, if you hear him speak your name, don't answer, don't move, don't blink. Asterisk, she blinked. And in that moment, something changed. Her phone buzzed on the desk. An alert from the orchard security team. Motion sensors triggered. Again. That's time. The camera caught something just outside the shelter entrance. A figure, small and hunched, standing perfectly still, facing the camera, watching the time. 3:17 a.m., the exact same time the first call had come in months ago. She grabbed her keys, heart hammering. Whatever, was out there. It wasn't done yet, and neither was she. Because as she pulled up to the orchard once more, headlights slicing through the fog, she saw it, a door, slightly ajar, the hatch to the shelter, open and on the ground. Right in front of it, a single footprint. Fresh. Pointing downward, like someone had just gone inside and hadn't come back out. Detective Sandra Rand stood at the edge of the shelter's open hatch, flashlight beam slicing through the thick darkness below. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, like the earth itself was holding on to the chill of decades past. She could hear the soft crunch of gravel behind her as backup arrived, but she didn't turn. Her focus was on the faint trail of red thread, dangling from the edge of the opening, swaying slightly, as if disturbed by something just beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time she'd seen it. The thread had appeared in every room of the shelter, tied in knots, wrapped around doll limbs, even braided into the hair of the children's drawings. It was a message, a symbol, maybe even a warning. And now, it was leading her deeper. She descended the metal rungs slowly, the cold biting into her fingers as she gripped the rusted bars. Each step echoed louder than the last, bouncing off the stone walls like a countdown. When her boots finally hit the floor, she swept the beam across the space. The room was exactly as she remembered, the scratched names, the doll remnants, the rules carved into the walls. But something was different. The silence was heavier. She moved toward the far wall, where the faint etching of Harper had been discovered, half carved, half erased, like it had been started and then stopped. In a hurry, she knelt, running gloved fingers over the grooves, feeling the uneven texture. This wasn't hesitation. This was interference. Someone, or something, hadn't wanted that name to be finished. Behind her, the radio crackled. "Detective, we're getting movement again, same spot as before." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the ceiling now, where the square hatch had been left open. The same hatch that had once been the only view the children had of the world above, the same hatch where, according to the journal, he had watched them. The whisper came again. Not from the radio, not from the surface, from inside the shelter. A slow, deliberate scratch, then silence. Then breath. Rand's pulse pounded in her ears. She turned slowly, scanning the room. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything felt off. Like the space was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for someone. Her flashlight flickered. Just once, but it was enough to make her grip the beam tighter. She backed toward the center of the room, scanning every corner. The dolls were still lined up neatly against the far wall, their stitched eyes watching, always watching. Only now, one of them looked different. Riley's doll. It had been untouched by the others, preserved like a relic. But now, its head was slightly turned, not much, just enough to notice. And in its hand, something new. A piece of red thread, wrapped tightly around its tiny wooden fingers. She stepped closer, heart hammering. The journal had said Riley remembers. It had said he told us one of us could go if someone stayed. Had said he watches from the square hole in the ceiling. But what if that wasn't just a memory? What if it was a rule? And what if someone was still following it? Her radio crackled again. "Detective, motion sensors just went off again, but this time, it's inside the shelter." Her breath caught. She wasn't alone. She turned slowly, flashlight beam sweeping the room, one last time, and that's when she saw it. A small figure, barely visible in the shadows, standing near the far wall. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief flash of light, she saw the face. Not a child, not a ghost, but something in between. Something that had waited for decades, and now, it had found someone who was listening. The beam steadied. The figure was gone. Only the thread remained, tied now around the doorknob of the sealed room at the far end of the shelter. Room 6. The room with the chair, the room with the spotlight, the room where the rules were made, and the door was no longer locked. It was open, just a crack, just enough, and inside, the whisper began again. Soft, slow, familiar, that it was a child's voice, but it didn't belong to any of the 6. It belonged to 7. Detective Sandra Rand stood frozen in the shelter. Flashlight beam locked on the open door of room 6. The whisper had faded, but its echo lingered in her chest like a second heartbeat. She had spent years chasing missing persons cases, but nothing had ever felt like this, like the walls themselves were breathing. Remembering, she stepped forward slowly, boots crunching over dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Room 6 was different from the others. No cat, no drawings, just the chair, bolted to the floor, spotlight overhead, and on the back wall, those words again. Asterisk to leave. You must take someone else's place. Asterisk, but it wasn't just the writing that made her stomach twist. It was the fact that the chair wasn't empty. A figure sat slumped in it, motionless, small, thin, a child's silhouette cast in shadows. Her breath caught as she raised the flashlight. Higher. And then the light hit the face. Not a ghost, not a memory. Riley Foster. Except he hadn't aged a day. His dark eyes blinked slowly, unfocused, like he had been waiting for her. His clothes were the same blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, scuffed sneakers. He looked exactly like the school photo from 1982, like he had never left. She took a step back, hand instinctively moving to her holster. "Riley," her voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A small red thread, already tied in. A tight knot. He held it up toward her, fingers trembling. Behind her, the hatch slammed shut. The flashlight flickered again, and when it steadied, the spotlight above the chair clicked on, blinding. She shielded her eyes, heart pounding. When she looked back, Riley was gone. Only the thread remained, placed neatly on the seat of the chair. She turned sharply, rushing back toward the sealed door. It wouldn't budge. She pounded on it, called for backup, but all she heard in response was the whisper again, not from behind her, not from the ceiling, but from inside the walls. A child's voice, not Riley's, Harper's. "I scratched it." Then silence, then scratching. She spun around, scanning the room. That's when she saw it, a new mark on the wall beneath the original message. Fresh, uneven. Another name being carved. Not hers, Harper Greer. Her pulse spiked. Harper had survived. Harper had come back. But if her name was being written now, after all these years, what did that mean? That she was still here, or that she never left? Outside, the radio crackled through static. "Detective, we've got movement again. This time, it's coming from inside the station." Her stomach dropped. The station. Where the files were. Where the journal was stored. Where the only surviving evidence of what happened in that shelter sat untouched in an evidence locker. She grabbed her radio. Lock down the building. No one goes in or out until I get there. No response. Just the same. Whisper again, louder, this time. Closer. From the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. And then the scratching stopped, replaced by footsteps, soft, small, coming from the ceiling. Something was watching. Something was listening. It knew she was close. Back at the station, officers scrambled to secure the premises. Motion sensors had gone off in the archives room, the same room where the recovered cassette tapes, the red yarn, and the torn class photo had been stored. They found the door ajar, the lock broken from the inside. Inside, everything was untouched, except for one thing. The photo. The restored image of the 7 children, Emma, Sean, Leah, Toby, Harper, Riley, and Greta, was now missing. In its place, pinned to the board with a single red thread, was a new photo. One no one recognized. A boy standing alone. Same age, same expression, same orchard behind him, but his face, it was familiar. To familiar, because it matched the sketch drawn in the abandoned farmhouse. The one labeled simply, him. Detective Sandra Rand stood in the dim glow of her office. The photograph of the 7 children still pinned to the board. The boy in the new image, the one no one recognized, had been traced to a missing persons report from 1976, Elijah Connors. A boy who vanished from a farm just 10 miles from Briar Glen Orchard. His file had been buried under decades of cold cases, misfiled reports, and quiet town secrets. But now, with Riley Foster still missing and the shelter sealed behind police tape, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. Elijah Connors was last seen near a farmhouse that had belonged to a man named Silas Lane. The same Silas Lane, whose name had been whispered for years. A ghost story passed between generations of Vermont locals. A man who supposedly vanished in the 1950s but had allegedly built hidden rooms beneath orchards and farmland. Rooms where children learned not to scream. Rooms where the rules were carved into walls and the red thread became a symbol of something far darker than anyone had imagined. Rand reopened the journal found in the shelter, flipping through the brittle pages until she found the line that had always stood out to her. Asterisk, he told us one of us could go if someone stayed. She read it again. Then again, her breath catching as the pieces began to fall into place. Harper Greer had come back. But what if she hadn't come back alone? She grabbed her keys and rushed out the door, ignoring the ringing phone behind her. If the shelter was a system, a cycle, then Harper wasn't just a survivor. She was the key. By the time she reached the orchard, the sky had turned gray, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. The shelter was still sealed, the entrance guarded by 2 officers. They hadn't seen anyone come or go. No signs of tampering, just the same silence that had haunted the place for decades. Rand descended the ladder alone, flashlight in one hand, journal in the other. The air was colder than before, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Blood, old dried, but still present. She moved through the rooms slowly, scanning the walls, the corners, the dolls still lined up like relics. Only now, Riley's doll was gone. She stopped in front of room 6. The chair was still bolted to the floor, the spotlight still hanging above. And on the back wall, the same message, asterisk, to leave. You must take someone else's place. She turned the page in the journal. He said that means I could leave. But Riley looked at me different after that. Her pulse quickened. Harper hadn't just taken someone's place. She had given asterisk someone else hers. The scratching sound came again, faint, rhythmic, coming from behind the wall. Rand spun, flashlight sweeping the room, until it landed on the scene between 2 concrete slabs, a hidden panel. Not the same one where the dolls had been found. This one was newer, recently moved. She pushed against it, the metal groaning in protest. Dust spilled from the edges as the panel shifted, revealing a narrow crawlspace beyond. The beam of her flashlight disappeared into the darkness, and then she saw it. A small red thread tied around a child's wrist, attached to a hand, attached to a body. Lying still, she stepped closer, heart hammering, and turned the body gently. It was Riley Foster, but not the boy from 1982. This Riley was older, in his 20s, his face untouched by time, his eyes closed, his hand still gripping the red thread like a lifeline. She checked for a pulse. Nothing. He was gone. But how? How had he survived when no one else had? And if he was dead, who had been watching her? She backed away slowly, heart pounding, when the whisper came again. Not from behind her, not from the walls, from the journal in her hand. A new entry, fresh ink, written in the same childish handwriting. Asterisk, he never left. He just waited for someone else to listen. Asterisk, the flashlight flickered, and in that moment, she felt it, something behind her, something watching. She turned. Room 6 was empty except for the chair, and the spotlight, and the message on the wall only. Now, the words had changed. Not to leave, you must take someone else's place. Now it read, asterisk, she did. Asterisk, Rand's breath caught. She stumbled back, nearly dropping the journal. The flashlight flickered again, then steadied. and in the reflection of the metal panel behind her, she saw it, a shadow, standing just outside the room, watching, waiting, and then it was gone. She ran up the ladder, out of the shelter, back to her car. She didn't stop until she was back at the station. She called in every officer, ordered a full lockdown of the orchard, issued a missing persons alert for Harper Greer. But as she sat at her desk, staring at the files, the photos, the journal, she realized the truth. Harper wasn't missing. She had taken someone else's place, just like the rules said, just like the red thread had always warned. And now, someone else had taken hers. Rand looked at the new photo on the board. The boy no one recognized, Elijah Connors. Or maybe not. Maybe his name had changed. Maybe his face had changed. Maybe he had learned the rules. Maybe he had become the man who taught them. Maybe he had never really left. Maybe he had just been waiting for someone else to listen. And now, he had found her. The door to her office creaked open behind her. She turned. No one was there. But on her desk, sitting, in the exact center, was a small red thread, tied in a knot, and beneath it, a single word, written in shaky handwriting. Asterisk ready. Asterisk, the wind had died down by the time Detective Sandra Rand returned to the orchard one last time. The trees stood, still, their branches heavy with the weight of old secrets. The shelter was sealed again, marked off with police tape and guarded by a silent presence that would remain until someone decided it was safe to forget. But for Rand, forgetting wasn't an option. Not after everything she had seen. The case had taken over 4 decades to crack open, and even now, the pieces didn't sit neatly in place like they did in textbooks or courtroom dramas. This wasn't about justice in the traditional sense. It was about truth, raw, unsettling, and buried so deep that even time couldn't erase its scars. Harper Greer had vanished from the records after 1982. But her story hadn't ended there. She had survived, yes, but not without cost. The red thread she tied around the cracked wall in room 7 was more than just a symbol. It was a promise. A message left behind for anyone who dared to listen. And now, 42 years later, someone finally had. Riley Foster's body was recovered. From the hidden crawlspace beneath the shelter, his face frozen in time, untouched by age. Forensics confirmed what the journal had hinted at. He had never truly left the system. He had stayed behind, learned the rules, become something else entirely. Whether he had been a victim, a survivor, or something in between remained unclear. But one thing was certain. He had waited. For decades, he had listened. And when Harper returned, when she whispered her thanks and tied that final knot, he had let go. Or maybe, he had simply passed the burden on. The name Silas Lane continued to haunt every report filed after the discovery. No official record existed of him after the 1950s, but the patterns were undeniable. Disappearances near orchards, hidden rooms beneath farmland, children who vanished without a trace. Greta Winton, the 7th child whose photo had been torn and burned, had been the first to understand the rules. She had taught them to the others. She had traded places with Harper. She had stayed behind so one child could escape. And yet, even after all this time, no remains were ever found for Greta, just the scratches on the ceiling, the handprint in blood, the words carved into concrete. I scratched it. The town of Windham County tried to move on. News vans packed up. Headlines faded. Life returned to the quiet rhythm of seasons changing and leaves falling. But some things couldn't be erased. Some wounds refused to heal. Parents kept their children closer. Teachers avoided mentioning the orchard. And those who remembered the names Emma, Sean, Leah, Toby, Riley, Harper carried them like ghosts in their hearts. Detective Rand stepped away from the shelter one final time, glancing back at the rope barrier fluttering in the breeze. She had spent years chasing missing persons, but nothing had prepared her for this. Not the silence, not the whispers in the walls, not the way the orchard seemed to remember. She drove home under a sky streaked with orange and gray, the air thick with the scent of autumn. That night, she sat alone in her office, flipping through the final reports. The cassette tapes had been archived, the journals locked away. The Polaroid photo, the one showing 5 children and a shadow beyond the wall, was stored in a sealed envelope, labeled evidence, do not open without supervisory approval. But as she stared at the file, she heard it again, a scratch, soft, slow, coming from the walls, not in the room. In her head, she turned off the light, letting the darkness settle around her like a second skin. Outside, the wind stirred the trees once more. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out into the night, and somewhere deeper still, beneath roots and dirt and forgotten footsteps, something listened, because the system hadn't ended. It had only changed hands, and now, someone else was ready. If you've made it this far, thank you for following along. If you love cold case mysteries, disturbing evidence, and true crime thrillers that unravel one chilling layer at a time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell so you never miss another story where the past refuses to stay buried. Until next time, keep asking questions. Keep digging for answers. And if you ever hear scratching in the walls, don't look up. Shelter was sealed again, marked off with police tape and guarded by a silent presence that would remain until someone decided it was safe to forget. But for Ran, forgetting wasn't an option. Not after everything she had seen. The case had taken over 4 decades to crack open, and even now, the pieces didn't sit neatly in place like they did in textbooks or courtroom dramas. This wasn't about justice in the traditional sense. It was about truth, raw, unsettling, and buried so deep that even time couldn't erase its scars. Harper Greer had vanished from the records after 1982. But her story hadn't ended there. She had survived, yes, but not without cost. The red thread she tied around the cracked wall in room 7 was more than just a symbol. It was a promise. A message left behind for anyone who dared to listen. And now, 42 years later, someone finally had. Riley Foster's body was recovered. From the hidden crawlspace beneath the shelter, his face frozen in time, untouched by age. Forensics confirmed what the journal had hinted at. He had never truly left the system. He had stayed behind, learned the rules, become something else entirely. Whether he had been a victim, a survivor, or something in between remained unclear. But one thing was certain. He had waited. For decades, he had listened. And when Harper returned, when she whispered her thanks and tied that final knot, he had let go. Or maybe, he had simply passed the burden on. The name Silas Lane continued to haunt every report filed after the discovery. No official record existed of him after the 1950s, but the patterns were undeniable. Disappearances near orchards, hidden rooms beneath farmland, children who vanished without a trace. Greta Winton, the 7th child whose photo had been torn and burned, had been the first to understand the rules. She had taught them to the others. She had traded places with Harper. She had stayed behind so one child could escape. And yet, even after all this time, no remains were ever found for Greta, just the scratches on the ceiling, the handprint in blood, the words carved into concrete, "I scratched it." The town of Windham County tried to move on. News vans packed up. Headlines faded. Life returned to the quiet rhythm of seasons changing and leaves falling. But some things couldn't be erased. Some wounds refused to heal. Parents kept their children closer. Teachers avoided mentioning the orchard. And those who remembered the names Emma, Sean, Leah, Toby, Riley, Harper carried them like ghosts in their hearts. Detective Rand stepped away from the shelter one final time, glancing back at the rope barrier fluttering in the breeze. She had spent years chasing missing persons, but nothing had prepared her for this. Not the silence, not the whispers in the walls, not the way the orchard seemed to remember. She drove home under a sky streaked with orange and gray, the air thick with the scent of autumn. That night, she sat alone in her office, flipping through the final reports. The cassette tapes had been archived, the journals locked away. The Polaroid photo, the one showing 5 children and a shadow beyond the wall, was stored in a sealed envelope, labeled evidence, "Do not open without supervisory approval." But as she stared at the file, she heard it again, a scratch, soft, slow, coming from the walls, not in the room. In her head, she turned off the light, letting the darkness settle around her like a second skin. Outside, the wind stirred the trees once more. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out into the night, and somewhere deeper still, beneath roots and dirt and forgotten footsteps, something listened, because the system hadn't ended. It had only changed hands, and now, someone else was ready. If you've made it this far, thank you for following along. If you love cold case mysteries, disturbing evidence, and true crime thrillers that unravel one chilling layer at a time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell so you never miss another story where the past refuses to stay buried. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep digging for answers. And if you ever hear scratching in the walls, don't look up.